Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kraft, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 8 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 16 rankings at both positions. So if you're looking for my thought on a specific tight end or quarterback, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, be sure to subscribe because I'm making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. So let's go ahead and begin by talking about matchups at the tight end position based on statistics allowed from weeks 1 through 7. We find that the Bengals, Packers, Steelers, Panthers, Colts, etc. are the more advantageous matchups going into the given week based on receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns allowed to opposing tight ends thus far this season. Of course, the Bengals at the top of this conversation, unlike any other, they've allowed 9 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends, a ridiculous number. But again, I wanted to present these statistics so we can take advantage of the upcoming matchups, as I will be referring back to them over the course of today's episode when I talk about these top 16 tight ends in specific. But I also wanted to go ahead and share some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week. Of course, the Atlanta Falcons, the Bills, the Chiefs have been incredible in terms of stopping opposing tight ends all season long, and they'll continue to be at that overall position as we approach the given week. With this all covered, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 16 tight ends. But before I do, for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings at tight end, quarterback, wide receiver, running back, kicker, defense, and flex for both half and full PPR rankings, be sure to travel down to the description of the video today and check out Betr. I'll be partnering with them not only to provide rankings every single Sunday morning for those of you who sign up, but also provide plays every single episode. I'll be putting together a couple plays in regards to the Thursday Night Football game later tonight between the Chargers and Vikings, and also some NBA games, putting together some plays. I like Jokic rebounds. I like Andrew Nembhard and his total points. Again, we'll go ahead and put those together at the end of today's episode. So for those of you who are trying to go ahead and make some plays tonight and of course get those rankings, sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10 and make a first time play minimum of $1, picking more or less on given player statistics, and you'll be eligible to get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. So for those of you who are trying to take advantage of the opportunity, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location, and new users who sign up today using code Andrew get a free $10, and you can take advantage of the free pick of 0.5 total passing yards from Justin Herbert in your place tonight. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's go ahead and begin by talking about my top 16 rankings at the tight end position, beginning with Tyler Warren, the tight end rookie that is coming off of a 4 consecutive game streak of 1 touchdown minimum. The primary reason he's been able to accomplish this is because, of course, the Indianapolis Colts offense this season has been one of the most efficient offenses in NFL history. They continue to get down into the red zone, and amongst all players thus far this season, Tyler Warren has the 8th most red zone targets. As long as those opportunities continue to go in his direction, he is going to be relevant. They take on the Tennessee Titans this week, and even though many of us are worried about Jonathan Taylor scoring 3+ rushing touchdowns once again this week, we know that, of course, Tyler Warren will be exposed to enough opportunity to find success. Recently, tight ends against the Tennessee Titans: New England, 6 catches, 44 and a touchdown. Las Vegas, 6 catches, 54 and a touchdown. We're hoping for a very similar line in regards to the overall potential of Tyler Warren this week. Number 2, we have Jake Ferguson, a tight end who is also scoring himself a bunch of touchdowns as of late. In fact, he has scored 6 receiving touchdowns in just the last 4 games. He's number 4 amongst all players in the National Football League in terms of red zone targets, and as long as those opportunities continue to go in his direction, as they did this most recent week, as he scored 2 receiving touchdowns, we're anticipating a lot of opportunity for Jake Ferguson, especially within the matchup against the Denver Broncos, who blitz about 30% of the time, which is top 5 in the National Football League in terms of blitz percentages. Amongst all tight ends in the National Football League, Jake Ferguson has the 9th highest target rate when blitzed amongst all tight ends in the National Football League, so he should bode well within the upcoming matchup on hand. Number 3, to close out the S tier, we have Tucker Kraft, coming off of a career high 10 targets. And very similar to Tyler Warren and Jake Ferguson, of course, Tucker Kraft is coming off of a week of scoring a touchdown. And of course, it's primarily because of the opportunity share that he's continued to be exposed to. All 3 of these players that I've mentioned thus far are all in the top 10 in terms of total red zone targets amongst all players thus far this season. But where Tucker Kraft is finding a lot of success is within the inline when he lines up next to an offensive tackle. Thus far this season, he's number 2 amongst all tight ends in terms of receiving yards from the inline, which the Pittsburgh Steelers have allowed the 6th most receiving yards to inline tight ends thus far this season. On top of the fact that the Steelers are allowing 13.72 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, which is the 3rd best matchup at the position. We've recently seen Cincinnati 4 catches, 44 and a touchdown. Cleveland 11 for 109. New England 10 for 118 and 2 touchdowns. Seattle 4 for 57 and a touchdown. Tucker Kraft an auto start once again this week. Number 4, to begin the A tier, we have George Kittle, who, yes, unfortunately is coming off of a 0-point performance this most recent week against the Atlanta Falcons. But the fact of the matter is, last week is one of only 2 games over the course of the last 16 healthy games of George Kittle's career where he is ranked outside of the top 12 of the tight end position within weekly rankings. In fact, 10 of the last 16 games in which he has played, he has been top 6 in terms of weekly rankings in a half PPR scoring format. And now we have an opportunity of Brock Purdy trending towards returning this week. We have to remember that George Kittle and Brock Purdy, in the 37 career games that they have played together healthy, George Kittle has scored 22 touchdowns in those 37 games. That's a 60% rate. Again, an incredible number. And even though this most recent week, yes, he had more run blocking attempts than routes ran, that is typically the case for George Kittle. But with Brock Purdy back, he will get himself a lot more opportunity within the upcoming matchup against the Houston Texans defense. Number 5, we have Oronde Gadsden, who plays tonight against the Minnesota Vikings, who for many of us was our number 1 waiver wire pickup of the week, considering he was coming off a performance of 9 targets, 7 catches, 164 and a touchdown. This is a former wide receiver turned tight end that is taking over this offense. And in this most recent game against the Indianapolis Colts, yes, a negative game script, he was given a vast majority of the overall opportunity within this offense, playing 60 total overall snaps in comparison to Conklin, who played 0, Disley, who played 3, and Fisk, who is the primary run blocking offensive lineman within this offense, playing 13 snaps. 69% of the overall routes that Gadsden ran on Sunday were from the slot or out wide. Again, he's a former wide receiver. He's going to continue to get himself a boatload of opportunity, especially when we take into account that the Minnesota Vikings most recently allowed out of the slot position Harold Fannin and David Njoku to combine for 7 receptions and 62 receiving yards. And when we take into account that Gadsden is going to be looked to a lot over the course of tonight, primarily because of the coverages that this Minnesota Vikings defense plays, I think he's an automatic pickup and play within the upcoming matchup. And of course, I'll be mentioning him within a better play later on in the episode. Number 6, to close out this year, we have Dallas Goedert. I understand that he's currently questionable with a calf injury, but the primary reason I wanted to mention him is because the last time out against the New York Giants, who he has a privilege of taking on this week, he had 11 targets, 9 catches, 110 yards, and a receiving touchdown for 21.5 fantasy points back in week 6, just a couple weeks ago. And in this most recent week, of course, we saw the New York Giants struggle against the Denver Broncos tight ends, in which they allowed them to accumulate 7 receptions and 62 yards. There's obviously a position to take advantage of in the form of a tight end against this New York Giants defense, and we're hoping that Dallas Goedert will be healthy and of course playing this week, but it wouldn't surprise me if he missed. So in the event in which you have the opportunity of playing one of our top 5 tight ends this week instead of him, I would lean in that direction, as we're not 100% certain of his status going into Sunday against the Giants. Travis Kelce is our number 7. Look, the Commanders have allowed the most receiving yards to opposing slot receiving options thus far this season. But in this most recent week for the Kansas City Chiefs, 7 different Kansas City receiving options caught a reception from the slot. So again, there's a lot of competition for Travis Kelce within this overall role. Rashee Rice coming back, Brashard Smith utilized in the slot receiving role, Juju Smith-Schuster. Again, many of different options, but even though this being the case, the Commanders are technically the 13th best matchup at the tight end position, nearly allowing 11 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. We've most recently seen Dallas score 2 touchdowns from their tight ends, Atlanta 70 and a touchdown, Green Bay 156 and a touchdown. There are many of weeks in which tight ends have found success. Hopefully Travis Kelce can find himself in the end zone, considering how successful this Chiefs offense has been, scoring 4 touchdowns a week offensively for 4 straight games. All right, our number 8 is Cade Otton. In the last 3 games, he has had 10.1, 7.6, and 10.0 fantasy points. And over the course of those weeks, 5, 6, and 9 targets, 19% of the overall target share, which again, 6.7 targets is not the greatest overall number, but it's trending in a positive direction, as we have confirmed Mike Evans, Bucky Irving, and Chris Godwin are out for another consecutive game. So in the event in which we have more opportunity going in the direction of Cade Otton, expect for a lot of success against the Saints, who are the 12th best matchup at the tight end position, allowing over 11 fantasy points per game thus far this season. Now last season, from weeks 8 through 10, of course, he played without Evans and Godwin, and throughout that span of time was getting 9.7 targets per game. But considering Emeka Egbuka is expected to be healthy this week, obviously dealing with a hamstring, I would anticipate Cade Otton's overall opportunity share to look very similar to the most recent 3 games, in which hopefully he'll be able to get himself anywhere between 7 to hopefully 12 fantasy points this week. Number 9, we have Mason Taylor. Look, the primary reason that I wanted to mention Mason Taylor is because last week, his 5 targets, 3 receptions, 31 yards, yes, were incredibly underwhelming, but all those statistics were gathered with Tyrod Taylor in the second half of the game. So imagine a full game with Tyrod Taylor taking on the number 1 matchup at the tight end position, the Cincinnati Bengals, allowing 18.8 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Again, they have recently allowed the Pittsburgh Steelers tight ends 11 receptions, 141 and 4 touchdowns. Green Bay, 3 for 50 and a touchdown. Detroit, 7 for 101 and 2 touchdowns. Minnesota, 6 for 61 and 2 touchdowns. Every single tight end finding success against the Cincinnati Bengals. Therefore, with Tyrod Taylor trending to start, I am firing up Mason Taylor. But in the event in which somehow, some way, Justin Fields starts this week, forget about playing Mason Taylor. Just bench him this week. Moving on to our number 10, we have Dalton Kincaid, who's been recovering from his injury over the course of the last 2 weeks. Obviously missed week 6 due to the injury, and of course was on a bye week in week 7, and now hopefully is expected to return. He has been limited in his overall practice participation, and that in my mind is not a good sign, but hopefully if he's available, he's an auto start, primarily because he's number 5 amongst all tight ends thus far this season in a half PPR in terms of fantasy points per game on average, and gets to take on the 4th best matchup at the position, the Panthers, allowing over 13 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. We've recently seen Arizona, 8 catches, 123. New England, 3 for 63 and a touchdown. Miami, 116 yards and a touchdown. Dallas, 43 and a touchdown. Many of tight ends finding success, and in the event in which, of course, Josh Allen's going to need to find Kincaid down in the red zone as they're lighting up this defense. Josh Allen, undefeated after bye weeks over the course of his entire career, 7-0, should definitely be implicated for some red zone utilization this week. Number 11, speaking of red zone utilization, we have Mark Andrews, who over the course of the last 2 games with Lamar Jackson had 12 targets on 47 passing attempts. That's a 25.5% target share, which is an incredible number. When we take into account that Mark Andrews with Lamar Jackson has scored 13 receiving touchdowns in the last 15 regular season games they have played together, the expectation is that Lamar Jackson coming back this week and Mark Andrews expected to get himself far more workload or utilization, primarily because of the advantageous matchup against the Bears, allowing over 10 fantasy points per game. Most recently allowed 91 yards to New Orleans, 43 and a touchdown to Washington, 87 yards to Dallas, 54 and a touchdown to Detroit. We would anticipate that Mark Andrews should be on a trend in which he's going to be finding himself a lot of utilization down in the red zone as this offense finds himself in those conversations far more often in comparison to the early half of the year. Number 12, we have TJ Hockenson. Over the course of the last 4 games with Carson Wentz, he has had himself 5, 4, 6, and 6 receptions, an 18% target share to be able to accomplish that, but a consistent reception count, which is very promising for a half or full PPR scoring format. And even though we do hope that he finds the end zone, I'm hoping that later tonight he's able to get that touchdown back, primarily because we've talked about it. Tight ends on Thursday Night Football have been dynamic. TJ Hockenson, Oronde Gadsden, both of them should be dominant forces tonight. Hopefully, both of them finding the end zone. But I think TJ Hawkinson's getting his touchdown back, as in 3 of the last 4 games, we have seen tight ends score against the Los Angeles Chargers. This most recent week, Indy, 5 catches, 75 and a touchdown. Miami, 6 for 51 and a touchdown. New York Giants, 4 for 30 and a touchdown. Expect for hopefully Hockenson to find that upside performance down near the red zone. Number 13, we have Kyle Pitts. The run-heavy game plan against the Miami Dolphins could lead to less opportunity, but the fact of the matter is the Dolphins are the 10th best matchup at the position. Even though this most recent week, the Cleveland tight ends only had 40 receiving yards, it was primarily because Dillon Gabriel only had 18 passing attempts in a rain-heavy game. Otherwise, the Los Angeles Chargers tight ends against the Miami Dolphins, 9 catches, 86. The Jets, 6 for 88. Buffalo, 6 for 71 and 2 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts implicated for a solid week if he scores a touchdown easily in the top 12. Otherwise, in terms of receptions and receiving yards in a half PPR, number 13 is a solid spot. Number 14, speaking of a solid position, we have Dalton Schultz, who is coming off of 9 receptions and 98 yards, highly utilized because, of course, the injuries that have taken place to this offense. But, I mean, this overall utilization hasn't been uncommon, as he has had 4 consecutive games of 5 or more receptions. When we take into account going into this week, Christian Kirk is dealing with a hamstring and Nico Collins is in the concussion protocol. Anticipate for a lot of utilization for Dalton Schultz, especially considering we've most recently seen Kyle Pitts against the 49ers, 7 catches for 62. Cade Otton, 5 for 51. Jacksonville, 9 catches, 68, and a touchdown from their tight ends. We have seen many of tight ends find success against this 49ers defense, and considering there aren't very many target opportunity threats in this offense in comparison to Schultz and Noel, I'm anticipating Schultz to find himself a lot of opportunity here. Hunter Henry's our number 15. It's pure and simple. If he scores a touchdown, he's relevant. If he doesn't, he's coming away with 4 or 5 catches, 40, 50 yards. That is basically what we're anticipating to see. We're hoping for touchdown upside. Obviously, Austin Hooper, Kayshon Boutte. There are many of other threats in this offense that continue to take away some of those opportunities, but the fact of the matter is he is still in this conversation on a weekly basis. The final tight end I wanted to mention is Fannin Jr. At this current moment in time, David Njoku is practicing and is still considered day-to-day with a knee injury. In the event in which David Njoku, who I am expecting to return this week and does in fact play, I think that is going to negatively impact the overall opportunity share of Fannin. Yes, over the course of this most recent week, he had 33% of the target share sent in his direction because this is a offense that obviously likes to utilize the tight end position at a high clip, and taking on the Patriots, allowing over 10 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends is great. But ultimately, when we're talking about Fannin, he is typically lining up in the slot position, while Njoku is more of the inline threat, where of course that has found the most success against the New England Patriots this season. Nonetheless, Fannin is a solid option, and in the event in which David Njoku does miss another consecutive game, I would move him up my rankings over the course of this week. All right, let's move on to the quarterback conversation, beginning with matchups. As you can tell, of course, fantasy points allowed via passing statistics isolated primarily because rushing statistics for someone like Jalen Hurts will not be able to accompany the performance of someone like Jared Goff because, again, there are two different types of quarterbacks. But when we talk about passing statistics isolated, the Cowboys, Ravens, Bengals, Commanders are the most advantageous matchups when we're talking about a 4-point per passing touchdown league and minus 2 points per interception thrown. I just wanted to go ahead and present some of the more advantageous and also some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into the given week because, of course, I will be referencing back to these over the course of today's episode, and I'm sure many of you are curious as to which matchups we should be taking advantage of at the quarterback position, considering many of us are dealing with a bye-apocalypse. Okay, let's get into talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings, beginning with our number 1, Patrick Mahomes. As of right now, Patrick Mahomes is clearing away the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football and now has an opportunity of taking on the 4th best matchup at the quarterback position. 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks that have taken on the Washington Commanders have scored over 18.5 fantasy points against them. And what gives Patrick Mahomes the competitive advantage is that either he is going to be in a competitive game where they're in a shootout back and forth and Patrick Mahomes is utilizing his legs to find fantasy points, or they're blowing out their opponents and he's throwing for 3 touchdowns. Best case scenario, upside, he does both of them in the same game, which he has already accomplished this season. But if he is able to accomplish that against Washington, it wouldn't be a surprise. That's what continues to make him the number 1 option. His rushing upside and the fact that this offense has scored 4 touchdowns per game minimum in each of the last 4 weeks. Our number 2, Josh Allen. Over the course of his career, he is 7-0 after the bye week. Over the course of this season thus far, 5 of the last 6 games with 2 touchdowns minimum, while also averaging 42 rushing yards per game, which again, the rushing yardage alone in that category, pretty much worth a passing touchdown. The fact of the matter is he's getting about 3 touchdowns worth of value there just off of passing touchdowns, rushing yardage. Anything he does through the air against the Carolina Panthers is only going to be that much more potential for upside. When you're taking on Andy Dalton, this game can turn into a shootout or it could turn into a blowout in the favor of the Buffalo Bills. Whichever way that goes, expect for a lot of upside from Josh Allen coming off of the bye. Lamar Jackson, speaking of coming off of the bye week, again, Lamar Jackson, much needed bye week in order to get healthy. Obviously, he's been limited in practice over the course of this week thus far, but we're expecting him to play, primarily because they need him to play at home this week against the Chicago Bears. Currently, they are 6.5-point favorites at home. The expectation is that Lamar Jackson is going to play, and from what we have seen earlier on this season, in the 3 healthy games in which he has played in, 26 plus fantasy points in every single one of those games. I mean, the Bears thus far this season have allowed the 3rd most passing touchdowns from opposing quarterbacks, 15 total. They have also allowed 2 plus passing touchdowns to 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks they have taken on. Expect for a lot of success here from Lamar Jackson. To begin the A tier, we have Jalen Hurts, one of our thumbnails of today's episode, who is coming off of one of his best games as a passer, an 83% passing completion percentage, 326 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. And he needed to lean towards the passing game primarily because this Eagles running attack has been decimated, with Saquon Barkley's efficiency dipping and the offensive line run blocking effectiveness being far less in comparison to years past, and at least the pass blocking is still holding up at an incredibly efficient rate, and that's what allowed Jalen Hurts to find success last week against a blitz-heavy Minnesota Vikings defense. Now you're taking on the Giants, another one of these blitz-heavy defenses, in which just a couple weeks ago he scored over 20 fantasy points against them, 283 yards, 1 passing touchdown, a rushing touchdown. I'm expecting an even greater performance this week. We have to keep an eye on A.J. Brown and his status this week as he is currently dealing with a hamstring, but as long as A.J. Brown and, of course, Dallas Goedert are healthy, I'm firing up Jalen Hurts at a top 5 capacity. Speaking of top 5, we have Bo Nix, who is taking on the number 1 matchup at the quarterback position. The Dallas Cowboys allowing over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. As of right now, this game is implicated to being the highest scoring game of the week with a 50.5 total. Thus far this season, the Dallas Cowboys have allowed 3 passing touchdowns in 4 of the last 6 games, and hopefully the comeback efforts of last week, Bo Nix finding as much success as he did in the fourth quarter, is going to elevate their spirits and allow them to be put in a position to where they're scoring early in this game to make it a back and forth competitive matchup. As of over the course of this season thus far, the Dallas Cowboys are the highest scoring team in the first half. Obviously, as of late, the Denver Broncos are one of the worst over the course of the last 3 weeks. So if in fact they end up starting slow once again, expect for, no matter what, a heavy passing threat in the second half from Bo Nix. Justin Herbert is our number 6. Joe Alt and Trey Pipkins, are they playing tonight? To be determined. In the event in which both starting tackles are back, I may increase his overall ranking, but for right now, I think this is a safe position because getting your starting tackles back against the blitz-heavy Minnesota Vikings defense would certainly be something that elevates his value, especially considering Dylan Gabriel threw 2 touchdowns against them. Jalen Hurts is coming off of 302 touchdowns his most recent week. We've seen many of quarterbacks find success in a pass-heavy threat against this secondary, and considering all the weapons that Justin Herbert has to his disposal, I'm hoping for a shootout tonight against the Minnesota Vikings at home for the Los Angeles Chargers. Number 7, we have Drake Maye. He is setting records on a weekly basis. I mean, he had just as many passing touchdowns as incompletions this most recent week. I mean, he set the record for the highest passing completion percentage by a New England Patriots quarterback. Drake Maye getting himself in the record books ahead of Tom Brady. In terms of overall efficiency thus far this season, he's in the record books with players such as Drew Brees. In terms of his overall effectiveness, it has been unbelievable. Besides his passing prowess, he also has the rushing upside that he presents every single week. This most recent game, 8 attempts for 62 yards. Whenever they get down near the goal line, there's always the threat of him rushing for a touchdown. And considering they're taking on Cleveland and how well this New England Patriots defense has played as of late, expect for a lot of opportunities in the direction of this offense, and specifically for Drake Maye to take advantage of that. Number 8, we have Jaxson Dart. The fact of the matter is, in 3 of the last 4 games in which he has started, he has had 19 or more fantasy points. This most recent game in Week 6 against Philadelphia, 23.6 fantasy points. And that was a game in which, yes, he did have 58 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, but he also had 3 rushing touchdowns given to Cam Scatterbo on the goal line. In the event in which this game is far more competitive, we could be put in a position in which Jaxson Dart, who is coming off of a great game of 3 passing touchdowns, 283 yards, and a rushing touchdown against the Denver Broncos defense. Sure, not the greatest passing completion percentage, but considering he's able to perform even in the toughest situations, I would anticipate with more passing potential upside in the given week for him to be even more fantasy successful. All right, continuing on, we have our number 9, Daniel Jones. Yes, our primary concern this week is Jonathan Taylor and the rushing touchdown upside, as Taylor has scored 3 rushing touchdowns in each of the last 2 games against the Tennessee Titans. Again, even though this is an immediate threat, Daniel Jones is coming off of 3 consecutive games of 2 or more passing touchdowns. He has scored 2 total touchdowns in 5 of the 7 games this season. Earlier this year against the Tennessee Titans in a blowout victory, only scored 15 fantasy points. Yes, that is the primary threat and fear, but I'm expecting 2 touchdowns minimum, if not even 3 this week. Number 10, we have Dak Prescott. Speaking of scoring 3 touchdowns, he has scored 3 passing touchdowns minimum in each of the last 4 consecutive games. He has been on fire. And yes, even though he takes on one of the tougher matchups, taking on the Denver Broncos this week, we have seen Jaxson Dart, 283 and 3 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 280 and 2 touchdowns. Justin Herbert, 300 and a touchdown. Daniel Jones, 316 and a touchdown. Many of quarterbacks throwing the ball very effectively against this defense in terms of yardage racked up. I'm anticipating that to be the case, as this is implicated to be one of the highest scoring games of the week at a 50.5 point total. Number 11, we have Baker Mayfield. Evans, Godwin, and Bucky Irving out once again. And even though Baker Mayfield is known for his consistency of throwing for 2 passing touchdowns on a weekly basis, he was not able to accomplish it this most recent week. But he has a bounce back game on our hands against the 9th best matchup at the position, taking on the Saints, allowing over 15.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks via passing statistics isolated. The Saints have allowed 2 passing touchdowns to every single quarterback except for this most recent week against Caleb Williams, who again did not have to pass the ball at all, as Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift led them to a victory. Number 12, we have Jordan Love taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, the Steelers are the 5th best matchup at the position, nearly 16.3 fantasy points per game allowed. We have seen, of course, them allow 2 passing touchdowns in 4 of the last 5 games to opposing quarterbacks. This most recent week, Joe Flacco was doing anything and everything he wanted to, whether that be through the air or even on the ground. Again, when Joe Flacco is running for a first down against you, that obviously speaks volumes, but nonetheless, when we're talking about the potential of Jordan Love, we're talking about the most recent production in terms of fantasy not being the prettiest. Scoring 2 touchdowns has been difficult, primarily because of what Josh Jacobs presents on a weekly basis, having scored 2 rushing touchdowns himself in each of the last 3 games. But hopefully with Christian Watson returning, with the big playmaking ability there, and hopefully the red zone utilization of Romeo Doubs being a little bit more pronounced this week, I'm expecting him to get him to that 2 touchdown range this week. Number 13, we have Joe Flacco. Speaking of scoring 2 touchdowns, in each of the last 2 games with the Bengals offense, he has thrown 2 touchdowns minimum. And now he's coming off of a 10-week hiatus between his most recent game against Pittsburgh, going up against the Jets this week. Being able to have that time off, learn the offense, build a rapport with your teammates, I believe it's only going to help elevate his potential production, taking on the 8th best matchup at the position. I was not anticipating that in 2025 we would see Tyrod Taylor versus Joe Flacco, but hey, this is the reality of this season. I'm anticipating still a pass-heavy approach, even though you are taking on the Jets secondary. I'm anticipating it primarily because, of course, the Bengals do not want to commit to a run game thus far this season. Number 14, we have Caleb Williams. Look, the fact of the matter is Caleb Williams hasn't been great this season, purely on the form of being a passer. Over the course of this season, he's really gotten bailed out by some of the rushing statistics he's been able to gather. And as of late, obviously because of the run-heavy threat of DeAndre Swift, he's kind of been hiding behind that. And this week, yes, he has an opportunity of taking on the 2nd best matchup at the position, taking on the Ravens. But I truly do believe that the Ravens' offensive support that they're going to get in the return of Lamar Jackson is going to improve their defense effectively. So Caleb Williams, in a negative game script, 6.5-point underdog on the road in Baltimore this upcoming Sunday. He's going to have to really light it up against his defense if he wants to make some noise. But again, I think the game script may force him to do so this week. Number 15, we have Marcus Mariota. In the last 4 games, as the Commander starter, 16.2, 20.3, 19.6, and 26.0 fantasy points, and now has an opportunity of potentially getting back Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin. If in fact this is the case, I would anticipate Marcus Mariota to be an auto start this week. We already know that he is starting and that Jaden Daniels is out, purely dependent on the status of Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin going into the Monday night game. The final player I wanted to mention is Aaron Rodgers, taking on the Packers, the 12th best matchup at the position, who have most recently given up 2 passing touchdowns to Jacoby Brissett, to Joe Flacco, and when they're having their way against that secondary, I'm anticipating Aaron Rodgers in a revenge game to be able to do much of the same. Again, I mentioned it earlier on in the episode, the Packers are giving up their fair share of points to opposing tight ends. Thus far this season, Aaron Rodgers, majority of his passing attempts as late going to Jonnu Smith, Freiermuth, Washington, Hayward, many of tight ends scoring touchdowns last week. In fact, all 4 passing touchdowns to tight ends. We would anticipate for this Packers defense and their run stop to force Aaron Rodgers to throw the ball even more, hopefully towards those tight ends that are going to continue to find success in the given week. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my tight end and quarterback rankings. Let's close out today's episode by putting together a couple plays via Betr. Let's check that out right now. So going into tonight's game, the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. I've mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. When it comes to Thursday night games this season, the tight end position has been unstoppable. So when we're talking about the potential of going into tonight's game, looking at the receiving yard counts of some of these receiving options, I would like to position myself to play Gadsden in a potential role here, going more than 42.5 receiving yards. He's accomplished that obviously in each of the last 2 games, as he has accumulated 7 receptions in each of the last 2 games. And then I also potentially want to implicate, TJ Hockenson, who has had himself, like you can see, 4+ receptions for 4 straight games with the likes of Carson Wentz. I think this is an incredibly solid play between these 2 tight ends. I think the potential of being able to get a discount here from Jordan Mason at 45.5 rushing yards, I think that is another one of these automatics. I like these 3 plays going into tonight in terms of going more on all 3 of them for a 4x overall play. Now, if we're going ahead and we're heading on over to the association, I like the following plays for tonight. Nikola Jokic, yes, he's one of the best players in the National Basketball Association, but what I like going into tonight is more than 10.5 rebounds. I think that is a great position to be in, taking on the Golden State Warriors. Then when we're talking about the rematch of the NBA Finals, we have the Thunder taking on the Pacers, I want to go ahead and with Tyrese Halliburton out, obviously dealing with the Achilles injury and the recovery of that, I'm going to go ahead and take Nembhard more than 13.5 points. Again, he's going to be filling in for the likes of someone like Tyrese Halliburton. Expect for a lot of potential upside there and opportunities in his direction. But as of right now, within these 5 plays, the 3 NFL plays, the 2 NBA plays, I'm separating them, and those are going to be my suggestions going into tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back later tonight, live streaming after the Thursday Night Football game. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.